Good evening, everyone. My name is Celeste de la Cabra. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to Cinema Sepulcher, the series where I scour my Blu-ray collection for 3 unwatched titles and discuss them in hopes of saving them from rotting on the shelf like a fetid corpse in a forgotten tomb. Okay, so we have 3 bangers to discuss today. I loved all 3 of the titles that we're going to discuss, and yeah, they all get very high recommendations from me. So I guess let's start off with, from Arrow Video and the one and only Guillermo del Toro, Crimson Peak. So there's the back, there's the disc, and there's the reversible cover art. So this one does have a Region A release, but I have the Region B version simply because I think it was just in the middle of a sale and it was very cheap, and I went ahead and threw it in to, make the shipping more worth it or whatever. But essentially Crimson Peak is a gothic romance written and directed by Guillermo del Toro. It follows a young girl named Edith as she is courted by another young man named Thomas who has a dark past that her father discovers and that is slowly revealed throughout the story. This is one where some people might accuse it of having style over substance, for sure, but I'm of the opinion that style is substance, or is at least a significant part of the substance of a film, so I don't generally like that critique, but to be fair, this is very overly stylized. Like, I think Guillermo del Toro really got carte blanche to just do whatever he wanted and just go fucking ham wild with the set designs and the costumes and the script and the special effects. I mean, everything is just so over the top. Cat on the shirt, cat on my lap. Everything is so over the top and melodramatic, and I absolutely love it. I was a little bit trepidatious, I suppose, before going into the film, because I know that it's not considered to be one of his more well-received. But aside from Nightmare Alley, this is the last film of mine to watch in his filmography before I've seen all of them. So I definitely wanted to prioritize it at some point, and the artwork on the Arrow Video version is just fucking stellar. It's just beautiful. And I'm glad that it's so beautiful because it's a film that really deserves a cover art that's as beautiful as the film itself. The film is just filled to the brim with beautiful gothic archways and hallways, with spooky ghosts that look unlike any ghosts I think I've ever seen in a film. The walls and the snow and just the entire film is oozing in this crimson red, which is technically clay in the film, but certainly signifies blood. I think all the actors give really impeccable performances. Jessica Chastain especially, I think, gives my favorite performance in the film, as well as the man who plays her father. His name is escaping me at the moment, but he gave actually a really great interview in the supplemental documentary where he essentially analyzes the style of horror that Del Toro specializes in and creates, and juxtaposes it with a lot of the, I guess the nice way to say it would be sleazier, maybe, campier versions of horror that we've seen in recent years. To briefly touch on the supplements, that 50-minute documentary that kind of sets off the laundry list of special features was the only one I had time to get to. But there are so many, and I went ahead and looked at the descriptions and runtimes just to see the breadth of what was included. And there's upwards of 12 different features on the disc, and some of them are shorter, but a lot of them are decently lengthed. So I simply just didn't have time to dive too deeply into that absolute wealth of material that Arrow has provided us. But rest assured that that's the version to get. I guess if you're a casual fan of the film, you're probably fine with the studio release or whatever, but I thought that this transfer looked absolutely stunning, and the special features are really something else. So if you're a fan of the film like I am, I highly recommend going for the Arrow edition. In terms of the film's themes, obviously ghost stories have a consistent theme throughout them, which is, I think, the mistakes or the horrors of the past coming back to haunt the present. And this film is no exception. I won't get into spoilers, but there are certain dark secrets in these characters' past that are attempting to warn them and prevent them from making the same mistakes, but are written off by some of the characters as being supernatural or just terrify some of the other characters. But essentially the premise or the inciting incident of the film kind of kickstarts what has been done before, and the past comes alive to try to warn these characters. The film is also very feminist in its treatment of its female characters, I think. I can't really go into why without ruining the end of the film, but let's just say that these are very multifaceted and strong female characters. Essentially, I think the film boils down to two main themes, which is one, pursuing your true self and seeking your own happiness, despite what others may think about that or what your parents may want for you. And then secondly, and maybe most importantly, I think it is certainly about, kind of like I said earlier, the ghosts of the past coming to haunt us and the ways that history tries to warn us of our mistakes and the ways that studying it can help us not repeat those same mistakes in the future. The romantic elements of the story are very well done. I really just loved everything about it, to be honest with you. But I think this film really kind of has its strong suit in its visuals, for sure. If you're like me and you're really into the whole gothic aesthetic or into classical horror films, sort of like, I mean, this really is a direct descendant of films like The Haunting or The Innocents or The Uninvited, those classic haunted house films, but with a much more violent edge to it. I also want to briefly mention how fucking good the score is. It is so beautiful and whimsical and unique and memorable. It really commands your attention. So I give this one an 8 out of 10. I really highly recommend it. Okay, next I wanted to discuss, again from Arrow Video and director Shinya Tsukamoto, A Snake of June. So this actually has 3 different films on it, so there's the reversible cover art is for a different film. But this is a part of the Solid Metal Nightmares box set that Arrow put out. I've been going through that one slowly but surely, and I've really been loving everything that's on it and everything that I see. And this one is no exception. This one is very strong. This film really seems to be interested in themes of eroticism, of voyeurism, and of sexual repression. And misogyny, really. The film really does take time and care to explore the misogynistic elements of its characters and of the effect that it has on the female protagonist. The basic premise of the film is that a woman who I think works for a suicide hotline, it's unclear. Some people say that it's like a cancer hotline, but I think it's a suicide hotline. She essentially works there, and an old caller of hers obtains, let's say, risque photos of her because he's a professional photographer and he's been stalking her essentially. And he calls her and blackmails her and threatens to show the photos to her husband if she doesn't comply with his demands. They're demands that on the surface seem to fulfill a sexual fetish for him, but the way that it is framed in the excuse that he gives, which I think is certainly controversial and up for debate, is that the things he's asking her to do are things that she's always wanted to do in the first place, and he's just giving her a mechanism through which she can finally go ahead and do it and have a good reason, because she's essentially being forced to. She also lives in a really loveless marriage with a really ugly husband who is self-obsessed, self-absorbed, and very misogynistic and does not pay attention to her at all. About halfway through the film, it gets really confusing, and I actually went ahead and watched it again with the commentary just to kind of help me understand it, because the information online about this film is very limited. But I think after rewatching it and after listening to the excellent commentary that's included on the disc, I do have a fairly solid understanding of both the plot elements and also the thematic undercurrents of what Tsukamoto is trying to say. The film's visual style is really interesting. It's in the traditional Academy ratio, except it's slightly wider. According to IMDb, it's 1:37 to 1 as opposed to 1:33. So it's slightly wider than that, but it gives it a very kind of focused and intimate feel in its portrayal of its characters. There's an excellent little making of documentary included on it where they really go in depth as to the different decisions that were made in regards to the making of the film. And in that documentary, the cinematographer talks about how Tsukamoto wanted to actually shoot it in a completely square aspect ratio, but it didn't turn out right and they couldn't do it, so he decided to go ahead and do the Academy ratio instead. The film is shot in black and white and then printed onto color film, with the only color being blue, so it's a monochromatic blue scale that the entire film is shot in. This gives it a really unique look that I've never really seen before, and it really exemplifies the consistent omnipresence of rain in the film and the things that that symbolizes, namely being sadness and sexuality. I think the film really operates in and lives in a very gray morality in terms of the actions of the sort of antagonist of the film, or the person who's asking her or making her do these things, and the results that actually come from it. It's a bit ambiguous as to whether or not she ends up appreciating him for it, and whether or not he ends up actually doing her a good thing or doing her a favor. Without giving away the ending, I think that it does have a very positive ending, though I think it's certainly up to interpretation, and there's a lot of unethical things happening in this film. The person who essentially plays the voyeur in the film and forces this lead actress to do all these things is played by the director, who usually casts himself in most, if not all, of his films. But I think that that gives it a really interesting angle where it's kind of writing himself in. It draws a really interesting parallel between what he's doing as a director and what he's doing as a character, because as a director, he's actually doing essentially the same thing, even though it's a lot more consensual in this context, but he's essentially asking her to do these things so that we can watch and enjoy them. I just thought that was a really interesting parallel that is made simply by casting himself in this role. I think viewers of this film will see a lot of similarities to films like Rear Window and Peeping Tom and Psycho. It certainly borrows a lot from Hitchcock in that regard, but it is certainly its own thing. It's not just an erotic thriller or a psychological horror. It's a kind of unique amalgamation of all of these things, and I think it really succeeds. So I gave this one an 8 out of 10 as well. I highly recommend you buy that whole set, but if you do, don't skip this one. It's really great. Okay, and the last film I wanted to discuss from the Criterion Collection at spine number 134 from director Benjamin Christiansen, HAXAN, alternatively titled Witchcraft Through the Ages. I saved this one for last because this is easily my favorite film that I watched in this stack. This absolutely blew my mind and is probably my new favorite silent film of all time. It came out in 1922. So let me give you a quick overview of the disc itself. It's that gorgeous booklet and this absolutely gorgeous reversible art. So this is one of those films where when I put it on and I sit through it, I sort of think that aesthetically it was made just for me, even though it was made 100 years ago. Any one of the images from this film would make an excellent tattoo or an amazing piece of art to hang on the wall or an album cover or what have you. But essentially this is it's a docudrama. So it's a documentary about the history of witchcraft, and there are also staged narrative scenes that are fictionalized. So it's like part documentary, part folk horror, but it's also an essay film. Christensen is definitely here to bring a specific message, and he made this film for a reason. I don't think it's a spoiler to tell you this because it's kind of the premise of the film, and essentially the film is a documentary, but he sets out to really go over the history of witchcraft and point out the ways in which these women were just severely mistreated and killed based on what was essentially a lie. And he draws direct scientific parallels from what at the time you would call hysteria to what at the before time you would call witchcraft, and how a lot of these symptoms can be scientifically explained. And these women were essentially persecuted for political reasons, for religious reasons, essentially for nothing. Christensen plays the devil himself, which is really fun. And there are just so many brilliant sequences throughout this. If you're like a really big fan of medieval history and the history of torture, that's a bit of a weird thing to be interested in, but it's one of my special interests in terms of history, is the horrible ways in which people inflict pain on each other. I guess just as an exercise in empathy or an exercise in understanding the most extremes of the human experience, I find it really fascinating. And this actually walks you through a lot of these torture devices that these poor women were subjected to. There's a lot of really convincing performances in this, and just incredible set design, costume design, etc. In terms of the special features, there's a second version of this film that was narrated by William S. Burroughs and is like trimmed down about 30 minutes. It's not that good. Honestly, there's no reason to watch that over the original, but it's a fun supplement to kind of compare and contrast, and some people might like it better, so definitely check it out. It's shorter, so why not? There's a supplement on here called Bibliothèque Diabolique, which I absolutely adored. It essentially goes through all of the old illustrations and woodcuts that are presented in the film and gives an explanation as to what it is and the actual source that Christensen sourced it from. So I got quite a few images saved on my phone just by Googling stuff that showed up in this, but that was such an enlightening and wonderful supplement to go through. I kind of wish more things like that existed, you know, just kind of selecting images from the film and showing the sources of them or the inspiration behind them and making an attempt to analyze why they're in there. The score on it was, I mean, obviously I could never have heard the original, but it is so beautifully recreated and performed on the disc. It's clear it was a labor of love, and the score is just beautiful. It really is. So I give this one a 9 out of 10. This one gets my top recommendation of the video. And if you ever see it in the next Barnes & Noble sale or whatever, and you're into silent films, or you're into folk horror films, or you're into gothic films, or you're into history, like the history of witchcraft and medieval torture, pick it up, because it is a banger, and is probably somewhere in my top 100, 150 films of all time. I don't have enough good things to say about it. So I guess I'll leave it at that so that hopefully you can experience the rest of it for yourself. But that's it for me today in terms of the 3 films we're discussing for this episode. But let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to talk about next episode. So next week, I want to discuss from Arrow Video and Brian De Palma, Obsession. From Arrow Video and Takashi Miike, Audition. And from the Criterion Collection, the original Nightmare Alley, because I'm hoping to watch Guillermo's version soon and cap off that filmography. So that's all from me today. You can find links in the description for my Letterboxd, my Instagram, and my Rate Your Music accounts. Please like the video and leave comments so that we can have a dialogue and a discussion about the films here. That's always my favorite part of this, is interacting with you lovely people. Please subscribe to the channel. We are so close to our goal of 100 subscribers. And that's it. Hail physical media and hail Satan.